Flames licked the prison's sky that night. The air was thick with smoke, and the sound of metal bars clanging filled every corner of the yard. Sirens screamed, boots pounded, and men yelled over each other in the chaos. Guards shouted orders no one listened to. Somewhere in the center of it all, an inmate named Darius Cole stood on top of a table, his fists raised high, yelling words that no one would ever forget. The riot had begun, one that would change everything. It started as a protest, but within minutes, it turned into something far bigger. Fires were spreading, alarms wouldn't stop ringing, and the gates that once seemed unbreakable were now hanging loose. Inside the control room, a guard hit the emergency lockdown switch, but the system failed. Cameras went black. Communication was lost. And in that 7-minute blackout, something happened, something no one would believe even when they saw it. The next morning, 3 inmates were missing. 2 guards were injured. And one man, who was supposed to be dead 15 years ago, showed up on the security footage. That discovery was what made the warden's blood run cold. It wasn't just a riot anymore. It was the uncovering of a secret buried deep within the walls of Stone Creek Federal Prison. Now let's go back, before the fire, before the screams, before anyone knew what was about to unfold. Stone Creek Federal Prison sat on the outskirts of Illinois, surrounded by nothing but endless forest and cold wind. Built in the 1950s, it was known for being the place where the government sent men they wanted forgotten. Darius Cole, serving a 20-year sentence for armed robbery, had been there for 8. He wasn't a troublemaker, not anymore. But when he started asking questions about an inmate who'd supposedly died years ago, everything began to change. That inmate's name was Michael Red Lawson. According to the prison's records, he died in an accident during a transfer back in 2008. But when Darius was assigned to clean out the old archives in the basement, he found something strange, a medical report with Red's name on it, dated 2 years after his supposed death. The report was signed by a doctor who didn't even work at Stone Creek at the time. At first, Darius thought it was just a clerical mistake. But when he quietly mentioned it to a guard named Officer Miller, the man's reaction told him everything. Miller froze, his face went pale, and he quickly told Darius to forget he'd ever seen it. But Darius wasn't the type to back down easily. That night, he told his cellmate, Ray Ortiz, what he'd found. Ray was older, calmer, and had a way of making sense of things others didn't. He listened carefully, then nodded. "You don't poke at ghosts, D," he warned. "Some things in this place are meant to stay buried." But curiosity was stronger than fear. Over the next few days, Darius started asking around. Most of the inmates claimed they didn't remember Red Lawson. Some said he was violent. Others said he was innocent. One man swore he'd seen Red dragged into the basement one night by guards and never come back. Every story was different, but they all ended the same way, silence. By the end of the week, Darius had drawn too much attention. The warden called him into his office for a chat. The office was dimly lit, with a large flag on the wall and the smell of old coffee in the air. Warden Samuel Beckett smiled in that fake, polite way that told you to watch your words. "I hear you've been digging where you shouldn't, Cole," Beckett said, leaning back in his chair. "Stone Creek's history is not your concern. You focus on your time, and you'll get through this just fine." Darius nodded but said nothing. Beckett leaned forward. "You start spreading rumors about the past, and people get hurt. Understand?" Darius walked out of that office with a pit in his stomach. Something wasn't right. That night, he found his mattress slashed open and a note left inside. "Stop asking questions." The next day, Darius was moved to another cell block, Block E. It was the oldest part of the prison, mostly empty, with rumors that it was haunted. That's when he met Jerome Banks, a quiet man serving life for murder. Jerome was strange, always staring out of his tiny window at the yard below. One night, Jerome said something that froze Darius in his tracks. "You're looking for Red Lawson," he whispered. "He's not dead. He's here." Darius tried to get more out of him, but Jerome just smiled. "Wait until lockdown. You'll hear him." That night, when the lights went out, Darius lay awake, staring at the ceiling. And then he heard it, 3 knocks, slow and steady, echoing through the pipes. Then a faint voice, almost like a whisper, carried through the air vents. They lied. The next morning, Darius told Ray what he'd heard. Ray didn't laugh or doubt him. He just looked serious. "If that's true," he said quietly, "then this whole place is a lie." Over the next few days, tension started building in the prison. Food went missing. The guards were on edge. Inmates whispered about escape plans, hidden tunnels, and strange noises from Block E. One afternoon, a fight broke out in the yard, small at first, then spreading like wildfire. By the time the guards arrived, it had turned into an all-out brawl. The prison went into lockdown, but it was too late. Someone had sabotaged the gates. The alarms failed. Inmates started breaking into supply rooms, lighting fires, shouting in every direction. Darius and Ray were trapped in the middle of it all when Jerome appeared, his face calm amidst the chaos. "You wanted to find Red," he said. "Now's your chance." He led them through a service corridor hidden behind the laundry room, down a staircase no one used anymore. The air grew colder, heavier. They passed through a door with a faded sign that read "Restricted Access, Authorized Personnel Only." On the other side was a hallway lined with metal doors. Behind one of them, Darius heard coughing. Jerome stopped at the third door, looked back, and whispered, "He's been waiting." Darius opened the door, and froze. Inside was a man, older, thinner, with a long gray beard and pale eyes that had seen too much. His voice cracked as he spoke. "You finally found me." It was Michael Red Lawson. The fires above were spreading, alarms still blaring, but all Darius could think was one thing. How could a man who'd been declared dead 15 years ago still be alive, locked away beneath the prison? Before he could ask, Red pointed at the ceiling and said, "They kept me here because I know what they did. And now, they'll come for you too." And just as Darius turned toward the sound of footsteps coming down the hall, the lights flickered out completely. The riot had reached the basement, and everything was about to change. The lights went out, and the world around Darius disappeared into total darkness. The only sounds were the flickering of the flames above and the heavy breathing of the men in the basement. The faint orange glow from the burning upper floors barely reached them, painting the walls in trembling shadows. Red Lawson's voice trembled as he whispered, "They know we're here." Ray reached for Darius's arm. "We need to move, now," he said. But before they could, footsteps echoed down the hall, not the panicked kind from fleeing inmates, but slow, controlled ones. Guards. Maybe even someone worse. Red stepped back into the cell and pulled up a loose panel in the floor. "This tunnel leads out," he said, his eyes darting toward the sound of boots approaching. "But it doesn't go where you think it does." Darius hesitated. He didn't trust this man, not yet, but the fire and screams from above left no choice. He jumped down into the narrow tunnel, followed by Ray, and then Red sealed the hatch behind them. The tunnel smelled of rust and mold. The air was thick and hard to breathe. Darius could barely see a few inches ahead. They crawled for what felt like forever, the sound of dripping water echoing around them. Every few minutes, Red would whisper, "Keep moving. We're almost there." When they finally reached the end, a metal grate blocked their way. Red pushed it open with surprising strength. Cold night air rushed in. They had made it outside, or so they thought. Instead of the prison yard, they found themselves in a wide underground room filled with old boxes, broken furniture, and walls covered in strange markings. It looked like part of the original prison structure that had been sealed off decades ago. There were no exits, just brick and shadow. Ray wiped sweat from his face. "You said this was a way out." Red shook his head. "It was, once. But they sealed it after they put me down here." Darius turned to him. "You said they declared you dead. Why? What did you see?" Red's hands trembled as he reached into his shirt and pulled out a small envelope, yellowed and damp. "Evidence," he said. "Proof of what they were doing in this prison, experiments, secret transfers, and bodies that never got reported." He handed it to Darius. "They used this place for more than punishment. And when I tried to expose it, they made me disappear." Before Darius could open the envelope, the tunnel behind them echoed with the sound of metal scraping. Someone was following them. Ray picked up a rusted pipe and whispered, "We're not alone." A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the room. A guard's voice called out, "Cole, step into the light." It wasn't just any guard, it was Officer Miller. His face was smeared with soot, his eyes wild. "You shouldn't have come down here," he said. "You don't know what you've done." Darius stood his ground. "Tell me what this place really is." Miller aimed his gun. "It's not your concern." Red stepped forward, his voice low and calm. "It's all of our concern. You kept me here. You made me a ghost." Miller's hand shook. "You weren't supposed to live." In that instant, everything exploded into motion. Ray swung the pipe, knocking the gun from Miller's hand. The shot went off, the sound echoing through the tunnels. Sparks rained from the ceiling as dust fell like ash. Darius grabbed the envelope and pulled Red toward the far end of the chamber. They found a narrow stairwell that led upward. The steps were weak, crumbling under their weight. Behind them, Miller yelled for backup. The alarms from the riot were still blaring above, mixing with the sound of breaking glass and sirens from outside the walls. When they burst through the door at the top of the stairs, they were inside a long-forgotten section of the prison, dark, cold, and covered in decades of grime. They could hear distant shouting, the chaos still raging. But now, there was something else, the sound of someone crying. A small, flickering light came from one of the old cells. Darius approached cautiously. Inside sat another man, his hair white and his eyes hollow. He looked up slowly and whispered, "You're not supposed to be here." Red froze. "Harvey." The old man nodded weakly. "They never stopped, Red. They just moved it deeper underground." Before anyone could speak again, a thunderous explosion shook the entire floor. Dust rained from the ceiling. The riot above had reached its breaking point. The fire was spreading fast. Ray shouted, "We have to move." Red grabbed Harvey by the arm. "No one gets left behind." They ran through the crumbling hallway, the heat and smoke growing thicker with every step. Darius clutched the envelope tight against his chest. Somewhere behind them, Miller's voice echoed again, shouting orders, calling for them to stop. When they reached the final door, it was locked. Ray kicked it. Once, twice, nothing. Then, suddenly, the old man, Harvey, stepped forward. "Move," he said softly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small brass key. The door creaked open. They stumbled into what looked like an old generator room. Flames were visible through cracks in the walls. The smell of smoke was choking them. But in the center of the room stood a single elevator, rusted and ancient. "This goes up to the old administrative wing," Harvey said. "If it still works, it's our way out." Ray pressed the button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a groan, the elevator doors opened. They piled in. Darius hit the highest floor he could find. The doors closed slowly, painfully, and the elevator jerked upward. None of them spoke. The only sound was the rumble of the machinery and the distant chaos below. Halfway up, the lights flickered again. Red looked at Darius. "Whatever happens, you can't let them get that envelope. It's the truth. About everything." Darius nodded. "We're not dying here." The elevator shook violently, stopping between floors. Smoke filled the shaft. They were trapped. The sound of gunfire echoed from above, and Miller's voice boomed through a nearby intercom. "You can't escape this, Cole. This riot ends now." Darius looked at the envelope in his hand, then at the others. He knew there was no going back. The riot wasn't just about anger anymore. It was about exposing what had been buried for years, and he was right in the middle of it. The metal walls of the elevator began to groan as the fire below spread upward. The cables snapped one by one with sharp, echoing cracks. Ray yelled, "Hold on." And before any of them could react, the elevator dropped. The sound of the fall filled the air like thunder. And then, darkness.